Hi yogis, welcome students, Jameson here, and I am so excited to discuss the history and the origins of yoga with all of you today. Now, the history of yoga is vast. It's much larger than we may have thought. It goes all the way back to ancient civilizations recorded in seals and manuscripts and different practices all along the way. And it has undergone many, many changes from its original version about 5,000 years ago up until today's current practice of yoga as we know it, that we get to share together. There's a lot of good history to yoga, and I think understanding the evolution of where yoga came from and how it got to be what it is today can really help put this practice in perspective and help us to achieve some of the benefits that come with the practice of yoga. And it might just pique our interest a little bit more and help us really embrace all the healing benefits that yoga has to offer. So with that, let's begin our lecture on the history of yoga. Very good. So I put this together. It also has had an evolution. We will go through the 6 major periods of yoga through the course of its history and the importance of each of those individual periods. Very good. Let's begin. So I really like definitions with anything that I'm studying. It's really important for me to know what the current understanding of a word is in our society today. And so this is out of the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and it has 2 different definitions for yoga. The first is a Hindu theistic philosophy teaching the suppression of all activity of body, mind, and will in order that the self may realize its distinction from them and attain liberation. Wow, there's a lot in that one. But basically it's saying it's a mind-body practice that goes deep into the soul so that we can start to recognize our ego and free ourselves from some of the ties that bind us. Definition number 2. A system of physical postures, breathing techniques, and sometimes meditation derived from yoga, but often practiced independently, especially in Western cultures, to promote physical and emotional well-being. Wow, there's a lot in that one too, right? It has physical postures, yes, asanas, breathing techniques, pranayamas, meditations, and it has a very unique expression in our Western culture. And it can help us on physical levels and emotional levels. So yes, yoga has all of the things that we are starting to experience by definition in the dictionary. Okay, let's get into the beginning. The Pashupati Seal. It is this seal. Here's the original one. Upper left. Upper right is a cast of the original seal, so you can see it a little bit better. And it was found in the Indus Valley in an archaeological excavation. So there was this hidden society, it was buried deep, and then they excavated it. And one of the archaeological finds was this Pashupati seal. And what do we see here? It is an image depicting a horned figure. We can see horns here on the left and the right, surrounded by animals. And the legs are actually folded in a yoga posture. This is believed to be the first representation of the Hindu god Shiva, or Lord of the Beasts. Now, we're not getting into Hindu theology, but just know that this is interpreted as Shiva, a Hindu god, sitting in a yoga posture. Now, this dates back to about 2,500 years before the Common Era, or approximately 5,000 years ago. And this can be interpreted either way. It can be interpreted as, yes, This is verified proof that this is the original yoga posture. Humans were practicing yoga 5,000 years ago. Or you can say, no, this actually isn't enough proof to show this as evidence of yoga. I like to think, this is opinion, based on the artifact that we have, is yes, it depicts a person seated in a yoga posture in a meditation position. This is pre-Vedic, which takes us to the Vedic period. So the Vedas are a collection of hymns and rituals that are all written in Sanskrit. And these are the most ancient Hindu scriptures. And we see in the Rig Veda the first written account of the word yoga. It dates back to before 1500 years before the Common Era. And we can see in the upper right over here an image of a Veda that is recorded in the language of Sanskrit. What is Sanskrit? So Sanskrit is an ancient Indo-European language of India in which the Hindu scriptures and classical Indian epics are written, and from which many northern Indian languages are derived. It's one of the oldest recorded languages on earth and became a foundation for many languages to evolve out of that still has influence in our society today. Now, when we are going through different yoga postures, there usually is an English name and then a name for it that you cannot really understand, like forward fold, Uttanasana, or downward dog, Adho Mukha Svanasana, or pigeon pose, Aja Rajo Kapotasana. All kinds of fun names from the original language in Sanskrit, and they have their literal translations into English, and that's what gives us the English names today. Moving from the Vedas, the Vedic period, now we have the pre-classical yoga period. And this covers approximately 2,000 years from 1500 before the Common Era to about 500 years after the Common Era. And there's two significant works involved here. The Upanishads are a collection of writings, again, that describe the idea of karma and start to get into cycles of life and death. And then the Bhagavad Gita, sacrificing the ego through self-knowledge, humility, and reverence leads to higher states of consciousness and self-realization. Now, it is important to know that during the Vedic period and pre-classical yoga period, there weren't yoga postures. People are not in a physical practice. It is a lot of philosophy and thoughts and belief, meditation. It's just sitting down. There's not a lot of movement involved during this period. The Upanishads are a series of sacred Hindu texts. They're written from 800 to 200 BCE, and it is unknown who wrote all of them, although the texts do exist. And this word derives from upa, meaning nearby, or at the proper place to sit down, and sad, to sit. And it means sitting near a teacher to receive the sacred teachings. And this was big. It was philosophy from a teacher to a student being passed down, working on this self-realization. And these are important because they outline a procedure for a seated posture to quiet the mind by restraining the breath. Okay, now we're getting into some various aspects of how do we practice yoga. And there is a sixfold path that is described in the Upanishads. The Bhagavad Gita is a seminal work in yoga history, in yoga philosophy. It is a 700-verse scripture, part of the Mahabharata, an ancient Indian Sanskrit epic. So it's one chapter of a larger book that was written in the 2nd century before the Common Era, and the author is attributed to Vyasa, a mythical and symbolic person. So not directly given to a single person, but this mythical figure who wrote the Bhagavad Gita. Again, this period, I guess they didn't like to sign their name after they were done with their works. And so it's just up for word of mouth to say, okay, this is actually who wrote this work. So the Bhagavad Gita, let's get into a little bit. It is a discourse, a conversation between Prince Arjuna and his charioteer Krishna, who is actually Lord Vishnu. Now, this again is Hindu theology, and it's discussing, right, through the lens of how Hinduism is thought about and expressed. Arjuna despairs on the violence and death war will cause. Prince Arjuna is on the battlefield, and he's so sad because the people that he's fighting are his brothers and his sisters and his cousins, and they're his people. Krishna, also Lord Vishnu, advises him to fulfill his warrior dharma through selfless action. And dharma is interpreted today to be your duty. It is your path. It is you do your duty because of it. We have children and they are our kids, and now it is our dharma to raise them to grow up to be strong and independent human beings in this world. There are many, many philosophical and spiritual topics debated between Krishna and Arjuna. There's a lot of good stuff to think about when you go through and read this text. In the Bhagavad Gita, we are given 3 different types of yoga. Karma yoga, the path of action. Bhakti yoga, the path of devotion. And jnana yoga, it's a silent J. The J there is more like a ya. Jnana yoga, the path of knowledge. In chapter 2, verse 47, we see you have a right to perform your prescribed duties, your dharma, but you are not entitled to the fruits of your actions. Never consider yourself to be the cause of the results of your activities, nor be attached to inaction. One way to look at this is focus on your actions in the present and release the results in the future. Another great way to think about this is it's the journey, not the destination. Don't worry about getting there so much. Stay focused on what's present, what's real right now in the moment. This is a great book. I recommend going through this if you are interested in diving a little bit deeper into yoga philosophy. It is a great place to start. Okay, moving out of the pre-classical yoga into classical yoga period. And this is defined by the Yoga Sutras as recorded by Patanjali. This period is characterized by a systematic way to approach the practice of yoga, and Patanjali outlines an 8-fold yogic path to achieve mental and emotional purification and self-transcendence. The Yoga Sutras were written by Patanjali, a Hindu sage believed to have written many works in yoga, but definitely accredited to the sutras. And this is the first time we see an actual definition written down of what is yoga. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the removal of the fluctuations of the mind. Yoga is stilling the mind. The monkey brain that wants to run all over the room and bounce from this corner to the next. Many of us say, I can't meditate, my brain doesn't stop moving. I feel the same way. Yoga is working on quieting the mind so that those fluctuations, those cessations become less and less, and we can find more peace and harmony through calm and tranquility. In this 8-fold path, there are the first 2 limbs are the yamas and the niyamas. These are the restraints and the controls. These would be analogous to the 10 Commandments in the Christian religion. It is a way of thinking about living, right? Ahimsa, benevolence, satya, truthfulness, asteya, even exchange, fairness, equity. Aparigraha is detachment or moderation. Brahmacharya, self-control. And then the niyamas would be Saucha, cleanliness. Santosha, appreciation or contentment. Tapas, self-discipline. Svadhyaya, self-study. And Ishvara, pranidhana, is surrender to something bigger than just you and I. The third limb, asana. Now, when Patanjali wrote this, asana translates to seat. It was a meditation posture. It was literally sitting down so that you can meditate. Pranayama is regulation of one's vital energy through breathing and eating, breath work and nutrition. Pratyahara, withdrawing the senses, sense control from the outer world and directing them to the inner world. Dharana is concentration on a single point. Dhyana is meditation. And then samadhi, or we call it enlightenment, a state of calm balance, the transcendence of the lower self and the union with the higher self. So this is the way to transcend along the spiritual path, the Eightfold Path of yoga, as described by Patanjali in the classical yoga period. Now we move into the post-classical yoga period. After Patanjali, yoga masters created a system to rejuvenate the body and prolong life. They rejected these ancient practices of the Vedas and embraced the physical body towards enlightenment. The human body was regarded as the temple of the immortal soul. And during this period, we see Tantra Yoga and Hatha Yoga develop systematically to achieve transcendence. Tantra Yoga has its roots during this post-classical period, a type of yoga that weaves together many different techniques that we see today: meditation, visualization, mudras, pranayama, self-study of the inner universe, and it is explored through the human body. Now, this Tantra Yoga that was developed during this time period is not the same as modern day sex Tantra. Now, it is true that there were practices that explored human sexuality during this period, but it is not what the media portrays. It is not just about having sex with as many people or whatever you may have read about currently today. Original Tantra is focused on the buildup and cultivation of Kundalini energy through these practices described: meditation, visualization, hand gestures, breathing techniques, self-study, getting to understand the body through movements. And this led to the development of Hatha Yoga. And Hatha Yoga is described in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. So this text was recorded in the 15th to 16th century Common Era. It's originally annotated by Svatmarama, and it is the classical text on Hatha Yoga. This is very important because it is this text that is the basis for what we have today, and it looks at the body as a vessel, immune from decay through asana. So that means that modern day asana has its roots in Hatha Yoga, where yoga postures can transform the body and purify it. And it taps into these energy pathways called nadis and these energy centers called chakras. Now, there's lots of different explanations on how many nadis: 84,000, 108,000, 111,000, and how many chakras: 7, 6, 12. What is current in our interpretation today is that there are 7 different chakras, and you can think of them as subtle body energy centers in our body. And they go from the base of our spine all the way up right through the tip top of our head. And there is a central channel that goes right up the center of them, the Shushumna, and then alternating channels that crisscross all the way up called the Ida and the Pingala. Now, these are subtle body energy centers, and we can shift the energy through these from the practice of yoga asana. There's also different purification techniques. Dauti, Basti, Neti is the Neti pot, which you might be familiar with. Jataka, Nali, Kapalabhati is a breath of fire, which we will learn over the course. Yes, so Hatha Yoga has its roots in Tantra, all of the different practices of visualization, meditation, breathing techniques, and then threaded into different yoga postures in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. This text also gave 16 specific yoga postures, and it was the first text that actually showed different yoga asanas, which now translates to yoga postures. We've kind of moved from that asana means seat in the classical period of Patanjali into asana meaning posture in this post-classical Hatha Yoga time period. That takes us to today, modern yoga or Western yoga. Yoga that we know today has only been around for about 100 years. Our current yoga often misses the depth of the history, any preceding yoga that came before it. But modern yoga is provided to more humans than has ever happened before in the past. And there's been an expansion and explosion in the West over the last 50 years. Through the course of yoga's history, yoga was this very esoteric practice that yogis, it was like, whoa, that yogi lives in the side of a mountain in a cave and he doesn't eat and he doesn't drink. And he has all of these different practices and he meditates a lot. And whoa, that's not a person who's involved in everyday society. Fast forward to today, where lots of people practice yoga. In fact, yoga is offered and accessible to pretty much everyone or anyone who wants the opportunity to practice yoga, which I think is a really cool thing. But let's remember, what we do today, this physical movement and practice of yoga, has only been around for about 100 years. And here's the modern history. Starts with this man, Krishnamacharya, the father of modern yoga. So he was a person who lived in India who blended the Indian physical education movement with the Hatha Yoga practice. He created many new postures and added an aerobic component to it. So now it was moving from one posture to the next, moving our bodies in all these different ways. He believed yoga could be a spiritual practice and a pathway for physical healing. He lived from 1888 to 1989, so he was over 100 years old practicing yoga all the way up until he passed and moved on from this earth. Krishnamacharya was the first person to do things like stand on his head, headstands, to bend over backwards with your forearms on the ground in a complete upside down U, to balance on hands. So he really took this Hatha Yoga, this original Hatha Yoga practice of physical postures, and excelled and evolved it into we can move our bodies in lots of different ways. Now, a couple of his students, K. Pattabhi Jois, developed and popularized the Mysore style, Mysore, India, Ashtanga Yoga. And Pattabhi Jois lived from 1915 to 2009. He was well into his 90s. B.K.S. Iyengar also studied under Krishnamacharya, and he developed Iyengar Yoga. And Iyengar is considered one of the foremost teachers in the world. His book, Light on Yoga, popularized and disseminated Indian yoga to the West. B.K.S. Iyengar lived from 1918 to 2014, well into his 90s too. And so there must be something about longevity with this practice if we look at these examples of these influential yogis who practice yoga their entire lives. Yogananda, Paramahamsa Yogananda, introduced millions of both Indians and Westerners to yoga through his foundation, the Self-Realization Fellowship. He wrote this book, Autobiography of a Yogi, telling of his life, legacy, and journey. And it was his life mission as given to him by his guru to share this practice of yoga, this more modern practice of yoga, with the world by traveling the world and giving lectures and holding seminars and really helping expose the practice of yoga. Now that, excuse me. Now again, this is within the last 50 to 100 years that all of this was happening before the modern yoga movement. Then we move into the 1970s to a man named Bikram Choudhury teaching hot yoga. And in this, he included full-length mirrors given a gym atmosphere attracting a modern crowd. So this is the popularization of modern yoga. Really, we can say this happened in Hollywood in the 1980s, where people were starting to move into this gym-style atmosphere. Exercise and athletics was something that was already common in the West. And so it was a nice doorway to introduce yoga into Western practices. Hot yoga provides a myriad of benefits, including increased flexibility, safely moving into deep postures. Sweating is a great form of elimination. The challenge builds mental toughness, and the heat training adapts the body to extreme conditions. Now, this is just one form of studio yoga. Yoga studios are very popular today, and we see a whole slew of different types of yoga being practiced that all have a common origin in the Hatha yoga practice, having yoga postures be the vessel to purify the mind, the body, the heart, and the soul. So yoga in the world today, this is some statistics from Compare Camp in May of 2020. We can see that, lots of good stuff here. 54% of yoga practitioners say that yoga helps them release tension. 66% of yoga practitioners do at least one class per year in an experimental setting. 94% of practitioners say they do yoga for wellness-related reasons. So a lot of people are practicing yoga for wellness. This is the purification of our body, mind, heart, breath system. There are over 100 styles of yoga. Lots of good statistics here to run through. So in conclusion, yoga has a very rich history that we could say goes back 5,000 years. And through the ages, yoga has evolved from this esoteric practice that was one person teaching philosophy to another person to a set of written methods, a systematic way, the Eightfold Path of Patanjali, into specific yoga postures using the body and not so much the mind as the pathway to reach transcendence. That Hatha yoga really set the stage for the westward expansion and evolution of yoga in our world today, where we have hundreds of different styles of yoga. We have yoga studios all over the world. We have these yoga postures that are being developed on a regular basis. And we can see that what we know as yoga today really stems from about 100 years ago, but it's about 50 years ago in the 70s and the 80s that we have the mainstream accessible yoga studio that we are all taking part in today. So through the rich history of yoga, we have gotten all the way to our current practice of a physical movement, body-centered, mentally benefited practice. And I will leave us with this final conclusion, a quote from Albert Einstein. He was a pretty smart dude. He said, "Life is like riding a bicycle. To keep your balance, you must keep moving." And I think that is really important for our current practice of yoga. Thousands of years ago, the world was not as busy as it is today. there were not as many people as there are today. And so as human population grew and societies evolved, so did the practice of yoga. And I see the yoga practice that we have today as being the perfect fit for our busy lifestyles, for our large communities, for our globalization of the human species. I hope that this lecture helped provide a nice background and put in context what we do, and maybe inspires you to want to learn more about the history of yoga and get to the roots, the foundations of what it is that we are doing here today. With that, I want to say thank you so much for paying attention and being interested, being open to this world of yoga and meditation and breathing and all the health and wellness that is associated with this practice. It's very near and dear to my heart, and I am just so happy that I can share it with you. So thank you so much. Namaste.